Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I buddy read this with Flora from Crazy Book Lady, who I will link down below. Definitely go check out her channel because she's really lovely. This is a classic novel about several people in the 1920s, I believe, who basically just go about their lives for a one-day period, morning to night, and kind of muse about life and death and what aging means. I gave this 3 stars. I believe Flora gave it 2. Neither of us were really fans of this one, and I think a lot of people don't like this book. I think this is one of those popular classics to hate, and I can understand why, but I can also really understand why people enjoy it. I'm sorry I didn't really give a good description of what it's about, but there's not really a specific plot for this book. It's literally just following the lives of a handful of people over the course of one day. They don't really intersect very much, and there's just a lot of discussion on life and aging and death, and that's what the book is about. So to start with the positives, I really enjoyed kind of the mundane aspects of this book. I enjoyed learning about life at the time and just seeing what it was like, because I really do like day in the life kind of books. And I love that about this one. And what I really wished was that it had been just a day in the life of Mrs. Dalloway. Because this book has so many characters that Mrs. Dalloway isn't even really the main character of this book. I don't fully understand why the title is Mrs. Dalloway, because she is a major focus, but she's not the only major focus, and there's so much else going on that it seems kind of misleading to call this book Mrs. Dalloway, in that it implies that it's mostly about Mrs. Dalloway, which she's 30% of this book, and there's another 30% who's about a former love interest of hers, and there's another 30% that's about this war veteran and his Italian wife, and then there's 10% that's just random people. But I enjoy really slow day in the life books. I think I've talked about that on my channel before and just said that I really love those because I find it interesting. And when books like that are well written, it turns the mundane aspects of life into something really beautiful and lyrical. And there were aspects of this book that I really loved for that reason. And I think had it been solely about Mrs. Dalloway, I would have enjoyed it more, because I think Mrs. Dalloway was the part of the book that I loved the most. Just seeing her go about her day, seeing her get ready for this party that she was hosting, seeing her stress about certain things that were so seemingly frivolous, but also not at the same time. It was just really interesting. But then we would flip into a new character, and I would be like, I don't know this character. I don't care about this character. I don't care about this plotline. I don't understand why this is a part of the book. And there was just enough of that overall I didn't really enjoy this book. It sounded like it ought to have been about a very interesting cast of characters. I mentioned some of the characters before. The former boyfriend of Mrs. Dalloway lives and works in India, so he adds that to the story. And it sounds like there's this war veteran and his Italian wife, and it sounds like a really interesting, compelling cast of characters. But they don't really intersect very much at all. Obviously, Mrs. Dalloway and her former boyfriend intersect, and then the war veteran and his wife are together very clearly, but it's just those story threads don't really intersect with each other. They don't really make much sense together, and they didn't work as a story for me. This felt like almost a series of vignettes about a variety of different people, and that would have made more sense as a storytelling structure than the novel that this turned out to be. I really liked a lot of the concepts of this. It was just the execution didn't work for me. But I do understand why it would work for other people. Why people would read this and think it was so beautiful. Because there were really some aspects that I enjoyed. It was just overall, as a complete work, it didn't work for me. I also really did enjoy some of her writing in this. She writes these very incredibly long sentences that honestly took me a little bit to get used to. But once I was in the habit of reading them, I found them really beautiful. They're almost circular in nature, where she would start a sentence with one point, and the sentence would be so long that it would kind of divert on this convoluted path and then eventually come back to the original point that I really, really enjoyed. I thought it was really lovely. And that kind of left me feeling that while I didn't like this story and I didn't like the construction and execution of it, I would very much be down to read some of Virginia Woolf in the future, because I do feel like after reading this, There's probably some Virginia Woolf that I would really enjoy and really appreciate. This wasn't it, but that's okay. There might be something else. So I definitely will read more of her in the future. There was one passage that I really, really loved that was on page 44 of my edition that I would read, except it's like 2 pages long, so like I couldn't read that much. But basically, it's about Mrs. Dalloway, which all my favorite parts in this book were about Mrs. Dalloway. And it's just about she's worrying that she wasn't invited to a lunch party or a lunch gathering at this woman's house. And she's like, oh no, this woman didn't invite me. And she invites all the most interesting people. And it sounds like a very frivolous thing. And then it kind of devolves into her worrying about aging and death and just life in general. And it's like very fascinating and deep. And then when that passage ends, it ends with just, oh no, Lady Bruton did not invite me to her lunch gathering, and she invites all the most interesting people, and it ends with that like seemingly superficial thing again. And I just found that specific passage really beautiful. I would love to read it, but like I said, it's way too long for me to just sit here and read out on camera. But just in general, the negatives kind of outweighed the positives for me. I felt the scope of this book was much too wide. It covered so many different characters, some characters who would just be here for a scene, some who were like constants in the book. And it was just so much going on that it didn't feel cohesive. It didn't feel like it had an underlying thread that held it all together. And I really didn't enjoy that. I really felt like it needed something that held it all together and gave it kind of a greater meaning for me, because it just felt kind of pointless and meandering. And normally I do like pointless and meandering, but because there was so much going on, it didn't feel like there was enough that I did enjoy. I did find the changes in point of view kind of annoying just because it was written in the third person and she used pronouns a lot, and there was never any notation of when it would focus on a different character. So sometimes I would miss the first time a name was brought up, and then a page later I would be confused, like, oh, we've used the pronoun she like 8 times, but are we talking about Rezia, or however you pronounce her name? It's Italian, I don't know, or Mrs. Dalloway, or some other character. And it was just like wouldn't be sure, and I would have to go back and check. And it happened enough that it was just like a mild irritation throughout the book. Like, not a huge deal, but just something that I constantly had to keep checking myself to make sure I was constantly aware, which is not something I have to do when I'm really enjoying a book. Overall, I was kind of bored and disinterested by this. It wasn't the book for me, and I do take part of that is probably my fault because I was buddy reading this, like I said, and we were reading in smaller sections, and I was just struggling to pick it up each time. And I do normally prefer to read books in like very large binge reading chunks. So that was kind of on me, but also I just didn't want to pick it up. I was, behind the entire time we were buddy reading and just like struggling to read the sections we were trying to read. Not because I really hated it or disliked it in any way, it was just I didn't really care. There was a lot about this book I enjoyed, but I didn't care. And I don't know, I couldn't rate it higher than 3 stars. I thought about doing 2, but for the good elements, I do think it deserved a 3, even if it was kind of like a mediocre 3, definitely not for me. But I don't know, I was disappointed by this one because I really did want to love it. But neither Flora nor I love this book, and honestly, I don't know many people who like do really enjoy this, but I can see why. I can see why this would be a book that some people really connect with. It wasn't for me. Hopefully I can find a Virginia Woolf book that I really do enjoy though, because I feel like there's one out there after reading this. There was enough in this book that I enjoyed that I feel like there's probably a book of hers that I will love. Let me know down below if you've read Mrs. Dalloway and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.